I grew up in Tasmania, in the far northwest coast of Tassie, in a place called Smithton, or the community around there. When I was a young guy, I actually had never been to church my whole life. And so I'd never been to a normal Sunday service and didn't really understand anything about Christianity. I always wanted to be somebody else, to be older, to be cooler, to fit in. And I was the fifth kid, our family of five. We often used to joke about me being the afterthought or the mistake. And I think that made me feel a little bit out of place, and I struggled a lot with acceptance and rejection. I think as I got older, some of those things started affecting me. Looking back, I can see that that's what drove me to look for both good and bad things. I wanted to know what life was all about. I'd been what I would call an atheist, and used to get into quite heated arguments with Christians. I sincerely thought they were crazy people. Started dabbling in drugs. I was 14, the beginning of year 10. Started dabbling in that sort of thing and drinking and all sorts of parties. Just experimenting. We read a lot about the destructive potential of drugs and drinking and so on. But people do it because there's an escape and there can be fun to be had. But the fun for me started diminishing over time because I started taking drugs in one shape or form or another every day. Smoke marijuana or do mushrooms or drink occasionally, unless I didn't have the money to buy those things. So what started out as fun and experimenting led me to a place where I felt quite depressed, and even at one point I remember feeling, what is the use of it all? What is the meaning of life? Why should I bother sticking around? And I put a rifle in my mouth and wondered about what it might be like just to finish now. When I was 14 years old, I remember reading a book that was based on the Bible, and it was called Mystery 666, which sounds sort of sinister. It was saying what the Bible was predicting would happen at the end of the world. And as I read this, I could see parallels with what was going on in the world back then in the 80s and still today, with what the Bible was claiming would happen prior to the return of Jesus Christ. When I read this small booklet, looking back, I now know that God caught my attention with it. At the time, I was just, to be honest, a bit freaked out by it. So I started to believe, as I read Mystery 666, that there was a devil and he was involved in the things going on in the world. And by extension then, that there must be a God. It was the logical conclusion. And this started really bothering me. I didn't know anything much about him. I'd heard a few messages, Christian messages on cassettes, and it was like everything that they were saying that was bad and evil to do, I was doing it. And I started to feel a growing sense of guilt, if you like, of my own sinful ways in relation to a holy God. And I'd read and heard right back from when I was 14 that the Bible said that Jesus was returning, and there were these signs the Bible said would precede his return. I figured that I was not in the best place if Jesus Christ was to come back, or if in some way I was to pass away. One night, a friend of mine and we had decided that we were going to go to a poppy field. Poppies are what you make opium from, and we were going to raid some of these poppies and boil them up in a pot on the stove. We'd been doing this with psychedelic mushrooms, and we were going to drink this stuff just to see what happened. And I was so glad we didn't do it because it might have poisoned me. But instead of doing that, the person's house that we were staying at was a Christian, and this other Christian came over that evening before we got a chance to do this, and they started really pressing us about maybe we should become Christians. And I remember thinking, I'm not ready for this. I don't want to do this yet. These guys were pressing us, and my friend, he said that yes, he wanted to become a Christian. So there were 4 guys, and we sat around a table in Tasmania in like this hippie house, and we all held hands while they prayed for my friend to become a Christian. They actually straight up asked me, they said, do you want to do this? And I said, no, I'm not ready. But I thought, well, I'll go along with this, and we all held hands, which was a very unblokey thing to do in Tasmania in the 1980s. And I was just thinking, I can't wait for this to be over. And as they prayed for this other friend, and he prayed a prayer of commitment to Jesus, as we prayed together, I just felt this black presence that I knew was evil and dark, and it started lifting up out of my shoulders. Now bear in mind, I've never been to church and hadn't been preconditioned to think about these sorts of things, but I felt this presence in the shape of a man lifting up this weight, and I'm like holding hands and they're praying and I'm having this experience, and I'm like, what is going on? And I had heard, even though I hadn't been to church, about things like evil spirits, and it did frighten me a bit, but I thought that something had happened. And so they were all talking to the other guys become a Christian, and I'm pretty quiet and just watching. And I went to the bedroom that night in that house to sleep, and next to this mattress on the floor there was a Bible and a candle. And I remember picking up the Bible, and I said in my heart to God, or perhaps out loud, I said, God, I think you're right and I'm wrong. And there was something in me that just said, and so I'm going to give this a go, I'm going to follow you, something like that. And something happened. I now know that at that moment in time I'd had an encounter with God, and that He's not actually looking for you to pray this precise prayer, but He's looking for a heart that turns towards Him. The next day we went to church, and I didn't really again understand what had happened, and church was weird but good. A cousin of mine was there, and he said, oh, it's good to see you here, Dale, at church. And yeah. And I said, everybody in my family, my dad needs this too. And he looked at me and said, well, I figure you need to sort your life out with God first, and then, maybe you can talk to your dad. I remember leaving that church and thinking, what's he talking about? I am right with God. Something happened last night. And again, I didn't know what the Bible said about assurance of salvation or being born again, but I knew that something had changed. And so I went up the main street of Smithton, and I saw this bloke that I knew and jumped in his car, and I said, mate, something's happened. And I started talking about, the experiences of the night before. And I lit up a cigarette with no thought that maybe a Christian, a follower of Jesus, shouldn't smoke. And I had half the cigarette and just felt sick. I thought, I just don't like this anymore. And I threw it out the window. I did smoke marijuana, and I tried it one more time. And I just thought, I don't want this. I don't want this life. I don't want to go this way. I remember I used to swear like a trooper. Everything was F this and F that and F you. For the next 3 years, I swore 2 times, once in my mind and once with my mouth. God did this supernatural cleaning up of external stuff. God did this dramatic change and helped me break free of stuff that had brought bondage into my life and set me on a new course. But when I come to know Christ, I was given a supernatural peace. Yes, He forgave the wrong things that I did as I committed my life to Him and turned away from them. But also something happened inside me that was awesome. Not just the stopping swearing and smoking and this sort of thing, and drugs and getting drunk, sex before marriage and so on, but this breaking of this black cloud of depression. I'd like to say that I've never ever felt depression over the rest of my days. I have, but I've never ever felt suicidal, and I've never been clinically depressed and been set free from that. And God's given me a purpose, a reason to be here, and a walk with Him that's very real. Christianity is not about man's dead religion, going to church, crossing all the T's and dotting the I's and jumping through hoops and giving money. But it's about a relationship with the living God. It's powerful, it's awesome, I'm deeply appreciative as to what He did for me back then, and it's a major reason why I continue to follow Him right now. I recommend Jesus to you. Read the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. If you want to know what God looks like, who God is, then look at Jesus. Jesus said, if you see me, you've seen what the Father God is like. He's radically different to a lot of man's dead religion. He's the King of Kings, He loves you, and He wants to know you and set you free.